course, we're talking about the production of what for photosynthetic organisms? What's the whole point, if you will? To make glucose, which is their food, right? They're going to use that as food that they convert into ATP. Okay, so the first step here is to understand the differences between autotrophs and heterotrophs. So photosynthetic organisms are autotrophs. What's the definition of an autotroph, George? Let's break it down. What does auto mean? Self. Do you remember what troph meant? Anybody remember what that meant? Self-eater, self-feeder. So it's an organism that makes its own food. Okay? Most of the time, that's using energy from the sun plus water plus CO2 to make glucose. Okay, so that's what we're looking at for an autotroph. Contrast that with a heterotroph. Ben, what's a heterotroph?
It's not able to make its own food.
So if you cannot make your own food, what do you have to do?
I don't know, scavenge for it, like get it yourself.
Yeah, you got to eat it. You got to go find it. Sometimes that means hunting it down. Sometimes that simply means walking up to a patch of grass and eating it. But you have to seek it out and consume it. You have to digest it. Okay, so that's what a heterotroph is. Which category do we fall into? Right, so obviously we're on this side. We have to go out and get our food. In the past, we used to hunt and gather. Now you do what? Go to cafeteria or Giant Eagle, right? Photosynthesis, a general overview. So this is a series of chemical reactions. What are the reactants for this product, I should say? Wait, what are the reactants for this reaction? Izzy? Carbon dioxide, water, anything else? What puts the photo in photosynthesis? Yeah, so the solar energy, light. Photo means light. So if you have those three things, in addition to the molecular machinery to do it, you can convert literally solar energy into what? Emma, what would you say the primary purpose, the primary product of this reaction is? Say it again? For food, yeah, which we call glucose. As a byproduct, you also make oxygen, which is actually quite important for the next step, cellular respiration. For us, we have to breathe in our oxygen. Plants produce their own. So we'll get to what that role is later. Okay, so the where of photosynthesis. So we had talked about an organism like a plant, or like a flower, like a tree. What is the primary photosynthetic component of that organism, Jerry?
Chloroplast.
So that would be the primary photosynthetic organelle, for sure. So you're skipping all the way down to the end over here. So that would be the primary photosynthetic pigment.
Are we going the wrong way?
You're going the wrong way. I want you to start out macro. Leaves.
Hey.
So leaves are like solar panels for the plant, right? So leaves take in light. It cruises through this mesophyll layer. That's the layer of cells that have the most chloroplasts. Mesophyll cell has the most chloroplasts, right? This is what it looks like in reality. We draw it like this. If you go into the chloroplast, you're going to see a structure. And I'm literally saying that photosynthesis occurs in this little red box, right? In this little red box is where the light reactions of photosynthesis take place, in that membrane and in that space. What is that structure, though? What is that stack? Yeah, Max?
Thylakoid.
Good. So these are, in fact, thylakoids. Say that with me. Thylakoids. Thylakoids. It's kind of a weird word, right? But it's stacks of thylakoids. And if you look at them on the side, you can actually see that they're sort of all connected. You guys asked some good questions online about, can these things fuse? Can they do that? Well, they're actually kind of already fused. But that thylakoid space and the thylakoid membrane, that's really important. By the way, if you forgot to participate in the learning community, you're late, right? So this is a graded thing now, this checking in online, asking a question, answering a question. If you have not done so already, after class, still go and make your contribution. It'll be a little late, but it'll still be there. Okay, so make sure that you do that. That's going to be a thing from now on, just to make sure that we're doing the work. Okay, here's the overview of the reactions. So again, don't be overwhelmed by this. Be able to look at this and interpret what you're seeing. So Jack, what structure are we in this figure? So cytoplasm would be out here. Over here you see the nucleus. Yeah, you're in a chloroplast. There you go. You're in a chloroplast. In fact, they show you over here, this is a plant cell. 1, 2, 3 chloroplasts in this visual representation. Okay? So George, judging by this figure, what is one initial reactant required for those light reactions? So see this light reaction right here? What do they require? So generally speaking, when arrows are coming out from something and pointing to something, that means it's produced. So you can say over here, these low energy molecules are important for going in. They're going to get recharged, sure. But two other things should stand out. And you can go back to the figure over here in red, the little discussion there. What goes in to the light reactions? So you said those. What else? Good. Light. We're seeing that right there. And water. Right? So carbon dioxide, to be clear, does not play a role in the light reactions. It plays a role in photosynthesis. But what specific part of photosynthesis does the carbon dioxide play a role in?
Calvin cycle.
Calvin cycle. And you can see that over here, right? Going into the Calvin cycle. So I'm just asking you to analyze and interpret, right? According to this figure, water and light go into light reactions. What's one thing that the light reactions produce, Sean? Oxygen. Is oxygen important to the process of photosynthesis? No, it's not really important. It's important for other processes, right? If you don't breathe in oxygen as a heterotroph, you're in trouble. But it's not really important for photosynthesis. So we call that a what?
Byproduct.
It is a byproduct. Okay? Light reactions also produce two high energy molecules. Ben, what are those molecules? Good. Shown right here, these are high energy. Now, you probably don't even know what those things are, but you can tell from that graph that they're being produced from the light reactions, right? Good. So it seems to me that they go into the Calvin cycle, are used up, come out low energy, and what does the light reactions do to them? Izzy, what would you say? convert it back into what? What sort of energy? Look at the board up here. Right? So here they're low, here they're high, and it's this cycle. Kelvin cycle is using that energy for something. You'll learn what that is later. Okay? Thanks. You can set that right there. Appreciate it. You're welcome. Okay. So somebody remind me, where are the light reactions occurring inside the chloroplast? Sean? So in this thylakoid space right here. Now, everywhere that there's not those thylakoid stacks, we call that area what? Emma? Stroma. So stroma is out here. Right? Stroma, 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 stroma. What critical part of photosynthesis actually occurs in that stroma?
The getting the light.
So the light plays a part in the light reactions in the thylakoids. Using this figure out here, what's happening out in the stroma? Use the board. It's okay. Remember we said there's the first part, the light reactions, and the second part is the Kelvin cycle. So Kelvin's out in this gray. So Kelvin's taking place out in the stroma, right? Question? You're going to say stroma. Everybody say stroma. Stroma is to cytoplasm as, stroma is to cytoplasm, that's a busted analogy, never mind. What I'm trying to say is the stroma is sort of the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, right? Just like the cytoplasm is the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, good. Okay, now we get to the most important part. This whole process of photosynthesis is to produce what? What'd you say, Max? Oh, it's Jerry's turn. I'm sorry.
Glucose.
Glucose, right? So remember this? Glucose. So this sugar here is going to act as what for the plant or for the tree or for the bush? Food. Okay. Just like when you eat glucose, but as a heterotroph, you have to go out and find it. You're not producing your own glucose. Autotrophs, those that can do photosynthesis, produce their own. And then they send it to the mitochondria to be broken down. We eat ours, we digest it, then we send it to the mitochondria in our cells. What category of macromolecule is glucose? It's coming back to haunt you. It never leaves the whole year. That first 2 weeks of your life, it never leaves. Is it A, a protein? Is it B, a carbohydrate? Is it C, a lipid? Is it D, a nucleic acid?
It is A. You just said I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
It was B.
It's B, carbohydrate, right? It's a carb. Now I can get real technical. What type of carb is it? Is it A, a monosaccharide? Is it B, a disaccharide? Is it C, a polysaccharide? It's a mono. It's a mono. In fact, this whole time, I've been waving around these styrofoam balls, and forget the pins in this one. Been waving around these styrofoam balls saying, this is a monosaccharide, this is a monosaccharide. That's what we're producing here in photosynthesis. So let's say we've produced one monosaccharide. What can the plant cell do with that? We've been saying this over and over again. Use it as food. Convert it to ATP. Energy. Let's say it has enough energy. What else can we do with this monosaccharide? Yeah?
We can store it.
Store it. So we're going to put that monosaccharide. What do we call that stored energy in plants? Anyone? I heard it. Somebody started it. It's actually starch is the stored energy. But it looks an awful lot like cellulose, which is also just a polysaccharide. And that the video had mentioned that the plants use that for structural support. a long time ago, but it's almost like I planned it, right? It's almost like I knew this chapter was coming. So 3 months ago, I said, hey, this glucose, this monosaccharide, it can be built into polysaccharides like cellulose and starch, right? So the reason you get a plant standing upright, not toppling over, the reason that corn is vertical, the reason that trees are vertical, the reason that even lowly grass is vertical, is because in its cell wall, it has cellulose that it produced by linking together monosaccharides, like glucose, that it produced through the process of photosynthesis. Yeah, so it's all connected. Okay. So that's it for the review. We're going to start in on some new stuff. And for some of you, it's going to be some scary new stuff. It's going to be physics. A little tiny sample taste of physics. What is physics? Anybody enjoy physics last year in middle school? Didn't you do physical science? Did you do some physics? What is physics? Should I call up Mr. Spicer or Miss Shine and ask them? What would you describe physics as? Yeah.
How things are able to operate.
Okay. Yeah. Based on what? Based on energy. Okay. Based on like these physical laws of the universe, right? What's one of the physical laws of the universe? Gravity. So you'll go to physics in your junior year and you'll talk about gravity every day. When I do this, this is gravity. But when I do this, gravity is a little different, right? Gravity still happens. Like when I do this, it takes gravity a little longer for it to come down, right? So it's sort of arcing across the room. Thanks. That's very nice of you to pick that up. If somebody walked by, it looked like I was probably having a temper tantrum or something. But, right? So that's physics. Another part of physics involves energy, right? So it involves how we can change and manipulate energy. In fact, one of the opportunities you'll have is to take, I think they're still doing AP Physics. You'll study the EM spectrum. Anybody know what that is? You know what EM stands for? Electromagnetic. What does that mean? What is electromagnetism? I really don't know, to be honest with you. I do know this, though. The EM spectrum basically represents the different kinds, I should say the different lengths of waves and the energy produced from those different wavelengths of energy. Okay? So if you look at this table, this chart, this picture, on the left you have waves that are what? Characterize those waves. Gamma rays, X-rays, UV. What are they in comparison to infrared, micro, and radio waves? Yeah.
Low frequency, but high energy. So,
I would say probably high frequency, right? Frequency is defined as the number of times something happens in a given unit of time. So something that's high hertz happens like often. Like, check this out. You can actually count that out over 10 seconds and give me a hertz for that. Is this a higher or lower frequency? Lower. How about that? Right? So the waves on the left are occurring much more frequently, but you're right to characterize them as much more energy. So if something's happening at a greater hertz, if it's happening faster, there's more energy in there, right? If something's happening slowly, or the incidents of that happening are further apart, you get into a situation where you see infrared, microwaves, and radio waves, right? Those are not as much energy. And from a biological perspective, which is what we all care about the most, those longer waves are not harmful to organic beings, whereas the short, high-frequency waves are, in fact, very dangerous for organisms. mostly because UV, X-ray, and certainly gamma rays can penetrate and damage your DNA. So we've all heard incidents of UV exposure. What does UV exposure oftentimes lead to? So if anybody in here is like a tanner, not like tanning leather, but like gets tanned. Yeah. Skin cancer. And that is because those UV rays can mess up your DNA. Anytime you go to the dentist, they throw an X-ray lead shield over your chest. Why is that? To protect your body from being bombarded with X-rays. And anybody that's read comic books, what happens when you get blasted with gamma rays? You get turned into a superhero or a puddle of mush, right? So, and that's because it rearranges your DNA to make you super, right? But there's a limit. Like if you're exposed to gamma rays, like at, I don't know, in space is probably the place that you'd be exposed to them. But if you got exposed to something like, I don't know, in a power plant or something, very bad news, right? If you're an X-ray technician, you wear a badge that registers how many X-rays you've been exposed to. Have you ever had your bones X-rayed? Anybody break something? So the technician says, hold your leg right there and don't move. And then what do? They beeline out of the room. They run. Or they're behind a wall that's reinforced with lead, because if they get bombarded with X-rays, they're going to be mutated, right? And anybody that gets exposed to UV outside, it's a bad situation. But, yeah.
You get a bunch of X-rays over top and they start to break down.
So there's an acceptable amount of exposure to X-rays. I would say that anytime you're getting an X-ray, it's not good, right? But you're not getting X-rays every day, right? Here's the thing. Why do we allow ourselves to be X-rayed? Because being X-rayed is better than having a broken bone, right? So it's a cost-benefit analysis. So yeah, I would definitely go get X-rayed if I fell off a second-story building. I wouldn't worry about the exposure to X-ray energy because my leg is probably broken, right? I wouldn't sit in an X-ray booth for fun, you know? So the things here to the right, infrared, microwaves, radio waves, are not, generally speaking, harmful. In fact, I am exposing Sean to waves as I'm pressing this. You want a little bit too? You want a little bit too? Right? You have a remote control in your house that turns the TV and you sit behind it every day and you turn it on, right? So that's no problem. Microwaves, same thing. Although those are longer wavelengths and probably not harmful, I'm not saying stand in front of a microwave, right? Obviously that extra energy is not good. And as you drive in the car and anywhere around town, you're being bombarded with radio waves. That's how we communicate on the radio, right? That's all well and good. There's only one real relevant section, though, for this electromagnetic spectrum that we care about for biology. Well, I mean, that's not true, but what we care about for photosynthesis. And you probably guess which one it is by just the diagram. What do we call that? Visible light, right? So this is one sliver right here of visible light, which is literally the only energy on the EM spectrum that we can interpret with our visual system. This is what we're concerned about when it comes to photosynthesis. So literally our eyes can see wavelengths of light that are 380 nanometers. It's very, very small waves, right? But not as small as UV, X-ray, and gamma. All the way up to 750. Now, a wavelength of 380 is interpreted by your mind as what color, according to the figure? Purple. And a wavelength of 750 would be interpreted as? Red, right? So here's the really neat thing, and I always like mentioning this, and it takes us on a 15-minute tangent usually, but it's still fun. What your mind sees as blue, right, or as gray. Gray is probably a bad color, but right, pink is just the wavelengths of light that bounce off the pigments in whatever fabric you're wearing. So Jack has pigments in this coat that absorb 380, that absorb 500, that absorb 600, that absorb 700, that absorb 750. What's the probably range of wavelengths that it's not absorbing and is instead reflecting into our eyes? According to that figure. 420, 430, 440 maybe, right? And so that wavelength hits your eye and your brain interprets it to be blue, which is something that we've all agreed to call what happens in our brain when we see that wavelength. See what I'm saying? Blue doesn't actually exist. But our brains, we have all agreed since since lower school to say this experience that we're seeing right now is blue. Yeah.
Somebody else see it as a different color?
Yeah. Well, you remember the famous dress scenario, right?
No, not colorblind, not colorblind.
So colorblind is a rewiring of the visual system that makes it see different, which also contributes to the idea that color doesn't exist, right? This is not this. Your brain is painting this in your mind, in your perception, which is artificial.
Life is the life.
What's that?
Life is the life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, this is a branch of psychology known as sensation and perception where philosophers and scientists debate like what we're actually experiencing and if it's real, right? Because you can go on for hours and hours and hours, like if that's blue or not, right? If I locked you in a cave from your birth, you came out and saw that, what would you call it? I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, that's an interesting aside. So what I'm saying is when you look at most photosynthetic organisms, what color do you see? Green. That means that what wavelength of light is refracted, reflected, not absorbed by that particular organism, Edward? Yeah, 500, 520, maybe up to 540. I think it's technically 480 to 550 or something like that, right? So those pigments in those plants, they absorb the purples, they absorb the blues, they absorb the yellows, the orange, the reds, but they don't absorb green. It blocks it out. Our eyes pick it up. We see green. Okay? Does that make sense to everyone? However, in the fall, you see this. What is this picture showing? Fall foliage. See, where I come from in New England, I last lived in Vermont, New Hampshire, people from around the world came to see this because only in like amazing deciduous forest, deciduous or trees that drop their leaves, right? And it has to be a certain climate. Do you get this fall foliage? So that is to say, again, most leaves are green until they're not. So why is it you think this is happening in the fall? Why do you see this explosive color of oranges, reds, yellows? Edward?
Because there is not enough energy from the light to keep the cycle going.
Good, that's part of it. The problem is like what happens in the fall? So starting late September, October, November, what is happening environmentally? Yes, temperature changes, so the temperature drops and there's less sunlight. So think about it from an evolutionary perspective. The pigment, which happens to be chlorophyll, you'll learn about chlorophyll here shortly. Chlorophyll is temperature sensitive and doesn't exist in cold temperatures. So it leaves and the plants don't make it anymore. So what are you seeing now in the background? Other pigments that instead reject what color? Orange, red, yellow, right? Because green is a non-issue. Green is not being produced. But now those that accept green but reject orange, accept green but reject yellow, they exist, right? And then after that happens, what happens to all the leaves? They fall. And why is that happening? They die, right? Because what is happening to that tree? It's essentially hibernating. Why? Because it's not making any more food. Why is it not making enough food to like justify having leaves? Because there's less sunlight. In Pittsburgh, there's practically no sunlight. Because even when it's daytime, it's gray, right? So it's not getting a good enough return on its investment. Why make leaves and keep leaves alive? Why keep making proteins and everything that goes with having a leaf if you're not going to get enough sun to make new glucose? Well, so then how do these things make it to the spring when the sun returns? Now you have to go back to biochemistry back in September when I told you this stuff was going to be useful and haunt you all year. Yeah. Stored energy as starches, saps, syrups, right? Okay. So that's what we're talking about here in this lesson so far. Is everybody comfortable with the physics of light? Understanding that certain things are absorbed and will power photosynthesis, but some things are rejected and don't play a role in photosynthesis? Yeah? Okay, I'll let you take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and start in. Anybody know what that type of protein is called? Now you do. A photosystem. So it's a membrane-bound protein, just like our channels, right? Just like those transport proteins, it's bound in the membrane. What membrane is it bound in? Say it again. Thylakoid. So I've been drawing chloroplasts like this and thylakoids like this. I want you to know that what we're looking at right there is that little cross-section right there. Can everybody see that? So we're zooming in right on just that one little piece of membrane and that protein that's embedded in that phospholipid bilayer. Okay? Now this is a photosystem. It's composed of two important parts. One is protein, right? We talked about proteins like this purple part embedded in the membrane. But there's a special part also for the photosystem that makes it able to do photosynthesis. What do you think that is? What's special about this protein, you think? How many proteins have I showed you with green pigment inside? None. So that's what makes it special. It's protein and pigment. Somebody remind me what pigment is. Jack's jacket has blue pigment. What is that pigment doing? Yeah. Yeah, so it absorbs some wavelengths of light and reflects others. Okay, so what color is that pigment there? Green. So it absorbs all the visible light except the green wavelengths. So when it bounces off, we interpret it as green. Okay? The protein is actually not purple. That's just sort of how they've drawn it there. Okay? So far, so good? So protein and pigments. Pigments absorb light. Okay? And the ability of those pigment molecules to absorb light is the key, the secret to photosynthesis. Okay? You can see here photons of light coming from the sun and interacting with that pigment. Okay? What does that drawing then show? Say it. Transfer of energy. So this pigment molecule gets excited. Because of that one, this one gets excited. Because of that one, this one gets excited. It's sort of like the wave at a stadium. Once one fan gets excited and starts to do the wave, what happens to the person next to him? What happens to the person next to her? Person next to her? Do you get excited halfway down the stadium? If I'm over here in the 500s, do you get excited over there in the 900s? Not immediately, not until the wave does what? Comes close to you, right? So what I'm saying here is that this has to happen, this has to happen. In order for this one to get excited, you have to have that rippling transfer of energy. Is that fair? Now, until you get into this little, what do we call this? The reaction center complex. You don't have to know it as that, but there's a special pair of chlorophyll molecules right here that as soon as they get excited, they do something. And this is your first sort of introduction to biochemistry in the membrane. As soon as this pair gets excited, we're showing you something right here happening. This E stands for what? Electrons. Brief aside, preview of chemistry. Since we've already previewed physics, we're going to preview chemistry. On the periodic table, every little box here represents, anybody know? Yeah, the atomic mass of what? Of individual elements, right? Element hydrogen, element helium, element lithium, right? Those are each different elements, and they're different because they're composed of different ratios of key things. Subatomic particles. Now, this isn't, I'm not going to test you on this, I just want you to know. What is a subatomic particle? Name one from your middle school physical science, which I know you guys all had. Yeah.
Neutrons.
Good.
All that stuff.
Yep. N equals neutron. Has a neutral charge. Electrons. Anybody know what charge electrons carry? They're negatively charged. And protons carry positive. So really the only difference between these elements and literally what all things in this universe are made up of, all the matter, is the ratio and number of these subatomic particles in each atom, each single discrete portion of each of those elements. Okay? So we're really going to be concerned with electrons for this unit, because electrons are what makes life possible, this transfer of electrons. So as soon as this chlorophyll gets excited here, it transfers this electron here, and now we're getting the process going, okay? This is the only space inside here where electrons get transferred. It doesn't get transferred in the dark purple. So far, so good? Anybody want to ask any questions? Anybody want to make any comments? Anybody want to leave? At least you're honest. At least you're honest. But I promise you that if you stick with me here, you're going to understand this stuff. Okay? Anybody that has to leave because of sports or whatever, you can go. Jerry, do you still have to leave?
Maybe on Thursday.
Oh, so today was the wrong day?
Wait, what?
Do you have like a swimming thing or anything today?
Yeah, that's on Thursday.
Okay. Well, today's not Thursday, so no. All right. So here are the light reactions. How many people are intimidated? Good. You're being honest. You're being honest. But if you listen to me and we do this step by step, this shouldn't be a problem, okay? You've already met photosystems, right? What are photosystems composed of? Maybe now you get worried.
Amino acids.
Proteins and pigments, right? Protein and pigments. So here's the first frustrating thing. The first photosystem in the pathway, I will say that there are two photosystems, one on the left and one on the right. are unfortunately reversed in their name. So the first photosystem in the pathway is called photosystem 2. The second photosystem in the pathway is called photosystem 1. That is because the first photosystem to be discovered was the second photosystem in the pathway. Does that make sense? So this guy was discovered first, this guy was discovered second, but then biochemists realized that this one played a role first, and this one played a role second.
They didn't fix it.
They didn't fix it because scientists are very fill in the blank. What was your adjective? What did you say? Stupid? Well, probably not. Protective. Protective is a good adjective. Anybody else? Arrogant? What else?
Lazy.
Lazy? No, the real deal is coming from a lab. As soon as, so say Ron Kinzer discovered Photosystem 1. And my rise to fame is when I put on my CV, I say, discovered Photosystem 1.
Oh.
Right? And I was like, applying to Harvard, I'm applying here, I'm applying there. I'm like, oh, I discovered Photosystem 1. You've never heard of photosynthesis? Yeah, Photosystem 1. And then I discover another one. And somebody says, well, you know, Dr. Kinzer, we really should change the name of that photosystem to Photosystem. No, you don't understand. I discovered that. And I need a career, I need funding, you're not changing anything. So we get into situations like this where things are awkwardly named. But that's no problem. No, man, you don't understand. Like, if your reputation and a job is based on something that you named, you're probably not going to change its name, right? That's why we call the Golgi apparatus the Golgi apparatus. Anybody, when we were doing that, ever wonder what a Golgi is? Somebody Google Golgi apparatus and tell me who discovered it. Yes. An Italian scientist named, what was his first name? Camillo Golgi. You think Camillo's letting go of Golgi? Probably not. So that's just the way it works. That we have to deal with it. All right. So the first photosystem in the pathway, photosystem 2, that's how I'll say this too, by the way. I'll say the first photosystem and then its name. So the first photosystem in the pathway, photosystem 2, encounters light. And what happens to the chlorophyll pigment in photosystem 2? Yes. Gets excited, and then we see the wave. And eventually you get to this, what we're calling special chlorophyll. We don't need to know that it's P680. And then it does what with its electrons? What do we say happens in this special central complex? What is the picture showing you? It's showing you that special chlorophyll sending a subatomic particle called electrons from down below to up here. Okay? That's the first step of photosynthesis. That electron is transferred. Okay? Pause for a moment there and understand how this process starts. Okay? Now, reason out the next step with me. We're going to stop right here. Come back to this spot right here in your mind. Now that I've transferred an electron from here to here, what have I done to the flow of the system? Yeah.
Question.
Sure.
Is light energy just called photon?
Yeah, photons of light. So a photon is a small, discrete packet of energy that comes from things like the sun. Yeah. So think of photon as a unit of energy. So, so you're doing a passing play in basketball, right? And one guy passes to the other guy, or girl, right? Now that the first person has passed to the next person will pass to the next person. How do you keep that drill going? You keep passing, but if I'm here, the first passer, am I done? You need another ball. And then it gets all the way down to the end, and what happens if you want to keep it going? Give me another ball, keep it going. Give me another ball, keep it going. Right? Until you get another ball, that drill shuts down. Is that fair to say? Same thing with photosynthesis. If this space right here doesn't get more electrons, what comes to a screeching halt? You're halting what? Photosynthesis, right? So what do we need to replenish? Electrons, right? Well, in comes a molecule of water. So literally, the reason that we need water as a reactant, the reason you need to water plants is because water is going to be broken down into its individual atoms, which if it's H2O are what? 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. It says 1/2 because it's 1/2 of O2. So 1 oxygen atom and 2 hydrogens. And guess what happens to the electrons in the hydrogen? They're the source of those replenished electrons. So far, so good? So why do you need water? To replenish electrons in photosystem 2. Well, let me ask you this. Why are you producing oxygen as a product then? Yeah.
Only uses the hydrogen.
Good. It's going to break down the hydrogen, take its electrons, which leaves a proton. That's what H plus means. And what's left over? Oxygen, which is a waste product created by this. So you've already explained 2 of the most important parts of photosynthesis. The reason that you need water is to replace electrons. The reason you produce oxygen is because you've broken down water, taken electrons from hydrogen, and now what's left over is atoms of oxygen. And it turns out it only leaves when it's 2 oxygens bound together, so that's why they say 1/2. Good? Okay. I know that's a lot. Let's just cover one more thing. We picked it up over here, right? What did we give to this region right here? This top portion right here. Electrons. So what do we want to do now? What is this arrow showing? Yeah, so the electrons that are bound here are transferred over to this protein, which transfers them over to this protein, which transfers them over to this protein. Okay? Guess what we call this series of proteins in the middle here? Perfect. Good job. Electron transport chain, which I will call ETC. Okay? What's that? Etc. That's right. It does stand for etc. So transfer, 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 transfer again. So that electron transport chain represents a bridge from the first photosystem in the pathway, photosystem 2, to the second photosystem in the pathway, photosystem 1. Okay? So that's that bridge. I'll tell you next class what that bridge is doing. Don't pack up just yet. We got 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen here in the next one. Well, we will. We'll pick that up next time. So we're going to stop right here and pick it up next time. Okay? Is anybody overwhelmed? If you review this a few times, you should get the hang of it.
Are there notes on this?
There's notes on this. I'm putting guiding questions. Let me pause this and